grateful to have all of you with us this morning. It's a beautiful spring morning here in Arizona. My name is Dustin Maroney. I'm the head of the Institutional Research Department at Rio Salado College.
And I'm Felix, and I'm the chair of languages and also the faculty assessment coordinator.
And so today we're going to talk about Dad Knows Best, and we'll give a little bit more information on what that actually means later on. But just our experience using student learning outcomes and using data to help improve the quality of our student learning outcomes assessment practice.
And before we get started, this is going to be the participant engagement part of the session. I would like you to raise your hand if you have student learning outcomes assessment all figured out at your institution. Dustin and I didn't raise our hands either. So, after listening to Dr. Hatfield's presentation, a lot of the work that we do aligns very closely with what she was talking about. But you'll see, even as we go through our own processes, there are clearly areas that we need to work on. But that's all part of assessment. So we just wanted to share our approach, what we're doing to really do that assessing for learning. We were doing years and years of assessment of learning. You just report the percentages and make graphs and everything. But it got to the point that we really needed to make sure that we were using our data to improve learning. And so that's what we're going to share with you today.
So to start a little background about who is Rio Salado College. So we were founded in 1978. We are one of the 10 colleges in the Maricopa County Community College District. And when we were created, we were given a very specific mission to help serve the non-traditional students. So we kind of were dubbed the college without walls. We did actually have walls, especially in the summertime. That's very helpful with the air conditioning inside. But we had classes that were over television. We had classes that were in malls. We had classes that were in high schools in the evenings. We were kind of trying to find all these different ways to serve the student population that couldn't come to a traditional campus between 8 and 5 on a Monday through Friday. We first started serving classes online back in 1995. I actually remember 1995 and how the internet was really kind of this novel thing. We were just kind of first learning about it. And at that time, we were putting college-level classes online.
And I just have to tell a little story, because I've been around that long and plus. And I got a call from the faculty chair at the time, and he said, "Hey, we're thinking about putting some courses online. Why don't you bring your computer?" And so to me, that meant the hard drive, the monitor, the keyboard, the mouse, because I didn't understand anything about how it all worked. Why don't you bring your computer down to the college and we will install a modem. Remember the thing? I had that for years at my house. And the kids knew that they couldn't make a telephone call if mommy was working, and that sort of thing. So this is way, way, way back when we started with this. So we are, from the very beginning, a small group of full-time residential faculty. Right now there are 21 of us. We've had more, we've had less, but that's how we were built. So our structure of having a one course, many sections model that is overseen by the chair with a large number of adjunct faculty, that structure was in place from the very beginning. So we were never a college that had a very large number of residential faculty members that had to collaborate to come up with one single course master. We have the ability to be very nimble because we do have that small number of residential faculty members. We started off teaching online courses using other platforms, using First Class, and we also had something called Amlon for a short period of time that actually crashed, like really crashed. Not one of those that, oops, it's down for a day or two. It went down and it was gone. All the courses, all the assessments, everything, gone. Luckily, our program wasn't that big at the time, but we knew that we needed to be able to create something that could be our own, in our own control, to be able to support that one course, many sections model, along with our rolling starts. So we formed a partnership with Dell Computers and Microsoft to come up with our own learning management system, which is called RealLearn. And we began offering courses in RealLearn back in 2004. And it's a real advantage for our institution because we can customize it. We don't have to go to a third-party vendor to get upgrades that we need to the system to be able to do our assessment work. It's built into the core of what we do. And we use Perception as a third-party vendor to plug in for assessment warehousing. And Dustin will be able to talk about that a little bit more, because remember, I'm the gal that brought her whole monitor and everything into the college for computer stuff. So the data warehousing and all of that will be Dustin's specialty.
And there is a big advantage of having all of our assessments in one software. All of the data from all of our assessments are in one central location. Now, as an institution, as a community college, we provide a lot of general education courses to our students, and a lot of them are intent to transfer to a four-year institution. So we have currently we have five college-level student learning outcomes: critical thinking, information literacy, reading, writing, and oral communication. Now, we have had some of these student learning outcomes for many years, and we have had a regular process of trying to infuse them throughout our curriculum. For a number of years ago, we added sustainability as a student learning outcome, and we really decided that it wasn't necessarily an outcome as much as it was kind of something we wanted just to be infused throughout everything that we do. We recently added, in the last year or so, oral communication. And you may think, gosh, you guys are an online or primarily an online institution. How do you deal with oral communication? Well, that's actually a relatively new software and tools allow us to be able to have our students record orally different presentations that they do, and our faculty can also record orally and give them feedback as well for the students that they can listen to, all in our learning management system.
And it's not just for the communication courses. That's what's so awesome. We have this ability in our feedback tool for instructors across all of the disciplines to have the students do oral presentations and be able to give them feedback. So once we had that ability to address it at a college-wide level, then we felt like we really could add that oral communication learning outcome.
One thing I also want to show, so we have critical thinking as a student learning outcome. And if you're paying attention to Dr. Hatfield's presentation, critical thinking is not a student learning outcome, it's a concept. Our use of these student learning outcomes is actually much more in depth than that. And I wanted to just bring up real briefly, so we have a standardized rubric for critical thinking for each of our student learning outcomes. And there are various dimensions within that we expect our students to be able to analyze, to evaluate, to be able to infer, deduce. And we have drafted or crafted within there various levels of student performance that aren't just the sometimes, occasionally, often, all the time. So it's really kind of helping break it down. So we're making some progress towards the vision that Dr. Hatfield had shared with us earlier today, but we clearly have some areas that we can continue to improve and refine in this. So let's go back here.
So each faculty chair, I did mention earlier that we have a small number of residential faculty. And these numbers are really just an average. Each faculty chair is responsible on average for 31 courses. I happen to have much more than that. I'm the chair of languages, so I have courses in Arabic and Japanese and Latin and Spanish, and I have more than 31. But there may be a chair like math who doesn't have as many courses, has a lot more students. So please, this is just bubbling it up, taking an average of everyone. But you can see 504 individual assessments on average per faculty chair with a total of 4,527 items. Thank you, Dustin, for the precise numbers there. But just to give you an idea, each faculty chair, it would be impossible for each one of us to be able to manage all of this if we didn't have a systems approach in place to this type of assessment. And so I get to be the BD slides. Everything that happened before Dustin, because I've been around forever. That old picture of Rio Salado College back in the beginning on the bottom right, that was a downtown office. Yep, I was there. We used to have to pay to make copies at like Walgreens and take your receipt down to the college so they could reimburse you the 75 cents or whatever you needed. It's been a long time that we've been involved in assessment work and this type of thing. So I'm able to speak to how the process was before. It was confusing and not very efficient, but we were trying. We've been trying for a long time, and I think we all are. We're just trying. It's all part of that cycle of assessment. What we used to do is choose one learning outcome per year. So say we chose writing, and then every faculty chair would have to choose at least one course and one assignment in which they felt that writing could be an issue that needed to be improved. But if you're the faculty chair over a huge department, very often it's just kind of a hit or miss thing. And so what we would do is like guess, right? You just, on your intuition, on perhaps student comments that you've heard before, you'd have to guess on whichever one you felt you needed to work on that year. And there was a standardized template for us to be able to request the baseline data from institutional research. This is just the first part of the template. So part of the problem is, you get this, you know that you have to do this work, but you're like, oh, I have to go through this whole issue with filling out all of these different areas in the request form, and even sitting down to do this work. This is only like the beginning of the screen. And then we've got the next part of the screen. And I just wanted to highlight something that's kind of funny to me, because when Dr. Hatfield was talking about what your targets should be, well, we kind of do some of that. Now, we don't have more than 1% in there, but we do say our college level target is that 80% of the students are performing at a level 3 or higher. Now, we don't use the 1 through 4 as much anymore. We used to take assignment scores and boil them down to ranges, a 1, 2, 3, and 4. And 3 and 4 were college level. That was like your C through A students. We're a little bit more precise now, but this was a few years ago. This is back in 2011. But we do say that if 80% of our students are performing at a college level, we feel that as the institution as a whole has met the target. So anyways, you put all this information into a SharePoint form, and then you submitted the data request electronically to institutional research. And you waited. This is true. This is not exaggerating.
Sometimes literally months. Now, the institutional research department, prior to my time, had some struggles, had some issues. I totally recognize that.
Yes. So, and then oftentimes this is what you got back. So all that work that I did, all the work institutional research did, pulling out the data from all the assessments, only to find out 100% of the students were performing at a college level on that particular assessment. Oh! So, there could be any number of things that could have happened. It could have been problems with inter-rater reliability. It could have been problems with the time frame that I selected. It could have been problems with, there had been updates in the course in the meantime, and yet I didn't go back because it had been so long since I submitted the request. There's all these types of things that could have happened. But in the end...
You just did a great job, that's all.
Yeah, well, but in the end, really, if you're trying to assess for learning, that was a big waste of time. Because it took all that time to figure out, well, we actually already met the target, so now I've got to pick something else and start the process all over again. And it's not very motivating either, because on the front end, we didn't have the data available to really be able to make informed decisions about our assessment practices. And I do want to make a point. We have a fund that's called Real Log. The LOG is a learning outcome grant. And Real Logs were specifically set up so that faculty chairs could engage adjunct faculty in assessment work. It's a point of pride to the institution, and we have a pretty healthy budget to do this work. And what would happen is if you were a chair that submitted your request and it came back that you hadn't met the target, you could then engage an adjunct faculty member to help you as a subject matter expert to do some assessment work, whether you needed to update the content or the assessments themselves, or you needed an instructional intervention, that sort of thing. Well, what would happen is you would have the chairs that got there first would ask for, the maximum amount of money that they would need, and it would all get eaten up right at the beginning. But we were all playing with this under the same set of rules. It's not necessarily that the chair knew for a fact that all this work needed to be done, but you wanted to put in your request early so that you had it just in case. And so what would happen is the real long budget would get eaten up early in the cycle before we even had the data back to know what changes needed to be made.
And I would add that several of our faculty chairs were very engaged in this process. And so they would submit a request to institutional research, they'd wait patiently, it'd come back and say, great, all your students are doing fantastic. But they wouldn't just say, okay, fantastic, I did my assessment, check that box and kind of move on with my life. They would then pick another course, another assessment, try again. And some of them had, Angela mentioned that we would focus on a particular student learning outcome for a year. The next year we'd pick a different one, the next year we'd pick a different one. So some of them had kind of these cycles that were existing across multiple years because they're just trying to find something to improve to help our students.
In full disclosure, I would be one of the ones that would put in my real log request early on because I knew how the process worked, right? And so I got the name that has continued on until this year because I've passed it on to our physical sciences chair. But I was always known as the real log hog. That's a true story, I did not make that up. And Hazel from Rio was shaking her head, yep, she was the real log hog. Now, you could also do other good work using that money, but it wasn't efficient, is the point.
So in 2013, I came on board to institutional research, and they kind of told me what was going on, and I said, you want me to do what and why, and this is our process. So I'm saying to myself, there has got to be a better way, a more strategic way, so that we're not spinning our wheels so frequently on our assessment efforts without really a visible benefit to our students. So one thing that I recognize is that we have all of our data in the perception tool. Fall of 2016, we have over 4 million unique data points just related to our subjective assessments. So we just have mounds and mounds of data. So really the challenge that I took upon myself was, okay, we've got to find a way to aggregate all of this and to present it in such a way that our faculty chairs, our residential faculty, can be more strategic about their assessment efforts. Because I truly believe that in the thousands of assessments and assessment items that existed, there has to be some that need help. Not every single one is just doing stellar. So we just needed to find a way to present that to our faculty chairs. So in 2014, we had a drastic pause. Maricopa Priorities came on board. Those of you who are part of the Maricopa Priorities Pause District will know about this. But this was instituted by our chancellor, and he said that, okay, we're going to spend all of our time and effort doing a big assessment of our programs, of our services, and everything. So really, all of our assessment practices that were related to, trying to improve the quality of our assessments, all of that was put on hold for a year or so. And then when we came back on board in 2015, I started working on this, my vision of how am I going to do this. And it was October of 2015, I came to an assessment team meeting, and I was sick as a dog, however sick dogs actually are. So I walk in the room late, I'm green, I've got Kleenexes, I say, don't touch me, I am sick, but I have to show you this because it's so cool. And I gave them the first preview of this tool that I had built to help show to them where are the assessments that truly need help, where your students are struggling for whatever reason. At that point, Angela, or one of the faculty, it might have been Angela, had the idea of, okay, you took all of our assessments, all of our dimensions, you aggregated it, but one thing that we can probably do as well is actually align every single dimension on our subjective assessments with one of our college student learning outcomes. So this started a fair bit of work from our 4 or 5 college student learning outcomes coordinators, who are all faculty. And one of the challenges that we came across is we were not strategic. Dr. Hatfield mentioned if you're strategic about how you build your curriculum and your outcomes, you start with your outcomes and then you kind of build everything. Well, we worked the opposite way, as many institutions have. And one of the things that we discovered is we had a whole number of courses that had assessments that had these different dimensions. So you have analysis, and then you have analysis with a space after it, for whatever that space adds. But from a computer perspective, those are two unique dimension names. Then you have analysis, ampersand evaluation, analysis, and evaluation. Analysis dash 5 points, analysis 5 points in parentheses, critical thinking and analysis, slash analysis, just analysis. So we literally had thousands of unique dimension names. And over the course of several weeks, our learning outcomes coordinators went through literally every single dimension name and said, does this align with one of our student learning outcomes, yes or no? I was then able to take all of that feedback and transfer it into our tool so that we can now actually look at what assessments even relate to critical thinking, what assessments relate to writing or reading. And this wasn't just a biology chair who's trying to decide, well, gosh, you know, does this align with writing? This was our writing expert who said, does this align with writing? So it helped actually bring a higher level order of analysis of our assessments and aligning them to our student learning outcomes. Then there was another pause.
So I have to tell a little story. Dustin had already 5 children at this time. And so he had left us with this awesome tool, and we didn't know what to call it. We said, you know, the thing that Dustin showed us. You know, the stuff with yellow highlights. And the columns, yeah, let's use that. That thing that has data, those numbers, that Dustin thing, right? And so we were sitting there in an assessment team meeting, and Dustin wasn't there because he was out on leave. His wife was having their 6th child. And so we were talking about what can we need to name it something. So at first we threw around the name assessment data display because we wanted to say, what is it really doing? And what it does is it displays our assessment data. You'll get to see in just a moment. And then I went, aha, what about Dustin's assessment data display? Or the dad. Because clearly dad knows best.
I don't know if I know best, but it just was some very fortuitous timing. So we actually want to show you the dad in action and the efforts that have been put into all.
And that's not Dustin.
I've grown my hair back. All right, so this is the first thing that you would see in the assessment data display. A few things I want to point out with this. This is simply an Excel-based tool. So by having it built in Microsoft Excel, it greatly lends to portability. There are very few people who don't have access to use Excel. So it's not like a SAS tool or a pyramid tool or something like that. It's just very, very portable with this. So there's some very basic information up at the top. This gives our faculty chairs control over timing. So if they want to look at all the assessments that they're responsible for a particular time frame. So I picked, just for convenience, January 1st of 2017 to the end of the month. And they can put in literally whatever time frame, going back probably 8 years if they really cared to go that far back. After they put in whatever time frame they want, they have a little button that they can click that just says refresh data. And it will bring up a little box and it will look at all the different courses that were offered in the time frame that was selected and give you a list of all the prefixes, because most of our chairs have responsibility for a prefix and then all the courses within that discipline. So they can go through and they can select from all the different available prefixes whichever one or ones that they are interested in. So they can pick 5, they can pick 12, they can pick all of them if they really care that much. So this particular example, we picked English. Because of how much data is behind this, if you try and pull 8 years of data for all of our courses, it's going to take the tool a long time to generate all of that. If you pick 1 month of one prefix, or even 6 months of one prefix, it'll probably have it back to you in maybe 8 seconds. So what happens is they click this, they click the little submit button, it does a little smiley face and say, we're thinking, we're thinking, we're thinking, and then you get your data. So this gives a lot of information right at the fingertips of our faculty chairs. So a few things to point out. So within whatever prefixes that have been selected, it will give you a list of all the different courses, all the different lessons, within each of those, or excuse me, not lessons, but all the different assessments. Within each of those assessments, these are particularly focused on subjective assessments. And because all of our subjective assessments are graded on a rubric, all the different rubric dimensions that are evaluated on that particular assessment. So here we have English 101, we have two different assessments, the lesson 1, the lesson 2. There are the different dimensions that are being assessed on each of those. It tells you how many students during that window you selected submitted that assessment and were graded, and then what percent of the students performed at or above college level. Angela mentioned before, college level is 70% or higher, so how many of your students are basically performing at the level we want? Within this, you'll notice that the lesson 2 topic, the dimension name of thesis, is highlighted. So one of the things that they have control over is the highlighting, and we'll do that in a second. But this is the one where less than 80% of your students are performing at or above college level. So it makes it easy to see across those two different assessments, what's the one area perhaps that may need a little bit of work.
And that really aligns well with the presentation we saw this morning, so that you can really drill down into the data. This is what's so exciting for us.
Now, this list may go on literally thousands of rows because of how many different assessments and dimensions and courses a particular faculty chair may be responsible for. So rather than having to just scroll and scroll and scroll, oh, there's a yellow line, scroll, 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 there's a yellow line, because it's Excel-based, there's a simple little feature where you can filter by color. So if you just select that, any of the drop-downs will work. You filter for all of your yellows, and now you see these are all the assessments, all the dimensions that are not performing at the threshold that you had selected. So we started at lesson 2. The next assessment wasn't all the way until lesson 12. So that would have been a fair bit of scrolling to even find the next one that needs to work. So quickly you can see these are the ones within my English 101 course where my students are not performing at the level that I want. Now, some of our courses, some of the more difficult courses, perhaps in the anatomy and physiology course, it's just inherently difficult. So if you set 80% as your benchmark, you're going to get back every single record is going to be highlighted because it's just difficult. Or you may have a course that's not as difficult and nothing is highlighted. So it makes it harder to identify, what do I need to work on? So the faculty chairs have control over the highlighting. So if they want to set their threshold at 80%, if they want to drop that down to 60%, say, okay, tell me the ones that are the worst performing ones. We also have given them the control to set a minimum threshold of students. Because if your dimension has only been assessed on 5 students, do you really want to be making decisions that needs some work? So you can decide, 25 students is the threshold I want, 100 students. You may have an English 101 course where you literally have thousands and thousands of students who are taking this on a regular basis. And so you want to be able to say, what are my assessments that are struggling, that are directly impacting the most volume of students? Because that's where I want to focus my energy first. So they have the ability to adjust that. As you scroll to the right, I know nobody likes scrolling left and right because the mouse only works up and down. But as you scroll to the right, there are several additional columns that are presented in the assessment data display. This is the alignment of each of those dimensions with our 5 student learning outcomes. Up at the top, there are some high-level statistics. This shows what percent of the students, for all of the critically thinking linked assessments, are performing at or above college level. Now, as you go through and you filter, say you pull all your English classes and you just filter for English 101, these statistics are dynamic, so they will only reflect what's actually showing on the screen based on your filters. So you can see, 83% of my students are doing well on critical thinking, 87 on reading, and so on. Here's another shot to show you can filter to say, I want to focus on critical thinking, so tell me all of my assessments that have been already aligned by our critical thinking chair for critical thinking. So it's lesson 1 short answer, lesson 4 short answer, and so on. You'll notice that many of these, the dimension name is analysis. A few of those are analysis with a space, a few of them aren't, but that's okay. But there are other ones as well. So step 2, analyze the problem. So it doesn't matter what the actual dimension name is because they've already all been aligned to our student learning outcomes. So you can identify critical thinking assessments, you can identify which ones are not performing at the level that I want, so that they can now be more strategic on the efforts that they're putting forward towards improving the quality of the assessment, the quality of the curriculum, the content, all of that.
And sometimes we don't make a change, because since we're looking at all of the assessments, you might see in lesson 2 that the student is not doing such a great job at whatever skill you're assessing, but by lesson 6 and 8 they are. Well, you would expect that. You would expect that the student's performance increases over time. But with a tool like this, we can see that. It's all there. So we're able to make informed decisions about where we want to spend our resources.
So everybody teaches Common 100 the same way with these particular lessons?
Yes, it's exactly the same course. And we're only talking about the online classes. These are only the online classes.
Now, one of the things that we discovered as we started using this tool and started improving the focus of our efforts is that many of our faculty chairs would identify an area that needs improvement. Then they would start intervening. They would change something about the assessment, about the content, whatever it may be, and then they would want to measure afterwards, did it make a difference? So rather than having to run the data and rerun it, I added another feature that allows them to quickly compare a before and after scenario. So they can pick their before intervention, they can pick whatever time frame they want. So here I just have, basically last fall of 2016, particular prefix, a particular course. Many of our courses, because we have the standardized model, go through different versions. And so you may have an accounting class and you did a major update and overhaul in August of 2016. And so you don't really want to be comparing your 2016 version of the course to your 2013 version of the course because it's just not the same thing. So we added that feature in there so they can compare different versions of the course. This is also intelligent, and so it knows based on what dates you put in, what prefixes are available on a drop-down menu. Once you select your prefix, it knows what courses are available based on that prefix. Once you pick the course, it knows what versions are available. Once you've selected that, it knows what assignments are available for you and then what dimensions are available for you. So in this particular example, they pick Accounting 240 and they show, for this particular lesson 3 exercise, the dimension is very conveniently called dimension. One of the things that we recognized early on is that while this was initially designed to focus on our 5 college-level student learning outcomes, it had value much beyond just that. So there may be other assessment practices and assessment efforts that aren't necessarily critical thinking, reading, writing. So the particular faculty chair over business for our accounting classes may recognize that something is not happening well on this particular assessment. It's not critical thinking, but there's still something wrong with it. So they can then go through, they can identify that, they can see, they can apply an intervention, and then they can test it. And at the end, they see that in the past, in fall, 67% of my students were performing at college level. They made an intervention in January, and now we're up to 81% of my students are performing at or above college level. So it makes it really easier for them to test and see, are my efforts actually making a difference for our students?
And how powerful is that? I mean, I just think it's so motivating when I go back in, because lots of times we put in instructional interventions and nothing changes. And I'm not saying it always comes out like this. I mean, sometimes you do the work and it just didn't make a difference. But boy, when you go in and you run that comparison and you see something like that, it's like, all right, now I've got to move on to the next one. But at least you feel good about hogging up that real logman.
Could you give us an example of an assessment?
Oh gosh, it could be anything. This could be an essay. This could be, I mean, it's an accounting class.
So if they take, everybody does it the same way every time.
Yes.
So whatever this was, an assignment or whatever, they use a rubric or they use something
Yes.
to report the data.
Yes.
And all the adjuncts who teach the class do it?
Yes. It's all the same grading practice.
And so for all of our subjective assignments within our Real Learn, our learning management system, for the faculty to grade an assessment, it pops up a rubric and it requires them to put a value on each of the different dimensions that have been tied to that particular assessment.
So I have a question, because Rio has a unique model of starts every Monday.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, faculty chairs drive the course content, curriculum, syllabi. Now, you, for example, are foreign languages. I'm assuming, and perhaps I'm wrong, but that you are not proficient in all of those languages.
You assume correctly.
So then, I guess, how does that feed back? Because obviously, there would be, faculty are gonna have areas where they're absolutely experts, but perhaps areas where they're not, that they're still responsible for.
Yes, that's why we have integrated our adjunct faculty
So that's
members
how it
as
folds back
subject
in.
matter experts from the very beginning. And so I will do this initial work and maybe find assignments in Arabic that have fallen below the threshold. So then I put in a request for some funding, I get my Arabic faculty members together, and they do that work. Yeah.
I'm just interested in the testing instruments themselves. The rubrics are used by all of the teachers and are standardized. What about the tests themselves? Are they standardized or are they created by individual teachers?
Well, they're created by the subject matter expert, who was the course developer, may or may not be the chair, depending, validated by the rest of the members in that group, and they all teach from the same assessment and use the same rubric for grading.
So, for example, if 5 of us are teaching the same class, we would all be using the same assessments.
Yes.
So about the only thing at this point that I haven't fully integrated into the assessment data display is that was easy class. Because it really puts so much data at the fingertips of our faculty chairs to be able to make informed decisions, to know where they need to go. So now, after all of this, we're going to talk about how has this changed our assessment practices. You can probably imagine what this may do, but Angela's going to share some thoughts on what's actually happening.
Yeah, and as you may have guessed all along, because we've said strategic a couple different times, this is really a new strategic approach to this assessment work. I can be in my office, pull up the results from across the entire department, and on the front end, I know where I need to dedicate resources. I'm able to submit requests for funding for projects that I know need work. And it has revolutionized the way that faculty approach assessment work. We feel like we really are able to make a difference and move the needle at an individual assessment level. And because of our one course, many sections model, that's a lot of bang for your buck. If you're able to increase the performance on a specific assessment, even by 5 percentage points, that's a big deal across so many students. So it's a really, really powerful tool. And we can focus on all the learning outcomes at the same time. You're able to really hone in on the ones that need attention, rather than waiting until the information literacy year, which may be 2 or 3 years down the road. Also, we have chairs that are absolutely experts in their fields, but may not be experts in all 5 of those learning outcomes. So we're able to focus on the actual content. And if I have, a chair may come to me and say, hey, I pulled my data and it looks like my students are not performing well on the critical thinking portions of this particular course, then I can help the chair come up with some critical thinking interventions because I happen to be the critical thinking coordinator. We have an information literacy coordinator, an oral communication coordinator. So we're able to work at a system level to work to improve student learning across those learning outcomes with the actual experts in the area. And then again, the real log situation. So now we don't have, a whole lot of hogs out there because you know what you need from the beginning, so you can actually put in funding specifically tied to the work that needs to be done. You don't need to just ask for all the money up front because you don't know what you're going to need to do at the end. And because of that, because it's now strategic, we have been able to increase our assessment budget. So for those of you that might be struggling with getting funding for assessment work, if you're able to say up front, we know that this work needs to be done. Here's the data to prove it. It's much more powerful. And so we have a larger pool of funds that we can dedicate to these. And not all of them are large changes that need to be made. Some of the real logs are $250, $300. because we want someone to go in and just look at this one particular part of an assessment and see if we need an additional instructional intervention or maybe the assessment needs to be tweaked. So I've got two.
I'm just gonna ask, once this data points out, let's say, areas of improvement, and the chairs are aware of it, how does the chair that can communicate that to the faculty that are teaching this?
Well, the
Is that-
faculty chairs are in close communication with all the faculty that teach that particular area.
And that would identify by particular course, like, you may have 10 English 101, but you can fine tune it to, but this particular section that's being taught might need more intervention than another.
We don't go down to the section
Okay.
level in this work.
Okay.
Because all of the lesson content assessments and rubrics are the same,
Okay.
when we find an issue in a student performance, we share it as a
Okay.
group and say, as a group, what do we need to do to improve performance on that particular assessment?
So all courses are mapped to your 5 learning outcomes? Is there any way we can get that data? Could you share that with us?
Well, as Dustin explained before, we had to do it backwards. If we had done it the other way around, then we would have an actual map that we could show. But what we had to do, like I did as the critical thinking coordinator, I went through the dimensions that were already written, that were already labeled. And I had to say, yes, that one's critical thinking, yes, that one's critical thinking. So it wouldn't make sense to anyone else because we were doing it on the back end.
Right, well, what you would end up getting,
I'd love to see
basically,
how you map, let's say, Common 100, for instance. You've got 5 learning outcomes. How did you map it to the 5 learning outcomes with your assignments? Do you have that
So
data?
what you would end up getting is, you've got your COM 100, you've got all the assessments, and each of those assessments are evaluating students on a variety of different dimension names. So it's those dimension names that have been tied to different student learning outcomes. So what you would end up getting is a list of like, okay, these 1,000 dimension names we have aligned with critical thinking. These 600 dimension names align with writing. These 450 dimension names align with information literacy.
No matter what course it's in. So we didn't take a specific course and map them. We took the dimensions. What is that assessment measuring? Is it measuring critical thinking? Is it measuring writing? Is it measuring information literacy? And some of these assessments cross more than one learning outcome. And then we went backwards. As long as we said, yes, it's assessing that skill, then it would be filtered using the assessment data display to show you at the course level which assessments align.
We can't see it even in one class?
We could share it with you. I don't know how much value you're going to get out of it. We can definitely sit down and I can pull it up.
I think it would help me understand what you're doing
Yeah,
better.
definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that we also recognized is within the last year or two, we submitted our assurance argument to the Higher Learning Commission as part of our accreditation cycle. And our chair who was kind of overseeing this process, she started putting my name in the document every time she needed some kind of data, whether it was related to assessment or not. And one day she told me, I've been control-Fing Dustin all day. She's looking, searching her document for every time that it says me. But you know, it's just one area where we've been able to find additional value in the work that we're doing, that it goes way beyond just basic assessment, improving student learning outcomes. We're able to use the results of this as evidence of our assessment practices, evidence of student performance. We also recognize that we had a need to start reporting on our co-curricular students and how are our co-curricular students doing on critical thinking and reading and so on. And as we sat there, we're like, so who are our co-curricular students? We kind of had some ideas that we used in the past, but this work, and through this work, we were able to come up with a very standardized definition of these are our co-curricular students. And many of them are our honor students, our Phi Theta Kappa students, our adult A students. We have a variety of students that we can clearly identify through our student information system as our co-curricular students. And then we can compare how are they doing on literally any and every assessment compared to our non-co-curricular students. So this would just be another simple example for, I don't even know what course I picked for this, but you can see the percent of all of our students who are performing at or above college level compared to our percent of co-curricular students who are performing at or above college level. One thing that we consistently found is that our co-curricular students were outperforming our non-co-curricular students across the board. So it's evidence that however we define co-curricular, it's clearly doing something. Our students are clearly benefiting from that. So it gives us impetus to continue to put emphasis on these co-curricular activities because we can show evidence that it's helping our students learn.
So every year we produce an annual assessment report. Well, which would make sense. Every year we produce an annual assessment report. I probably could have chosen one or the other. So here's an example. Dustin mentioned earlier that we found other uses than just the student learning outcomes. There's also an objective piece that's in this, that you can pull up all the objective assignments and see how students are doing. Those aren't particularly aligned with anything because they don't have dimension names, but you can look at quiz performance and like item analysis and that sort of thing. So here's an example of a before and after for our dental program. And if you can read the chart, before the intervention on lesson 3, the average score was 54 and only 57% of the students were performing at a college level. And you can also see similar results for that lesson 10 assignment. So this is just an example of once our dental chair was able to pull up this data across multiple courses, sections, semesters, was able to see that this is something that really needed intervention. After the intervention, 175. I mean, it's remarkable that once you're able to focus your attention and you can implement interventions that apply to all of the students taking that course, it can really make a difference.
And that's something to smile about. Come on, it's dental.
Come
You
on,
gotta
dental. I take the blame for that. Dustin said, I don't know, kind of cool. Go on.
You know, another example, sustainability. This was our faculty chair who's responsible for our sustainability courses. This was one where she actually changed the threshold. So she recognized that I can't even get to 60% of my students performing at or above college level, or performing at the 60% mark. And so she was able to kind of take the basic concept of what we were doing, apply it to her situation, apply interventions, and test to see, am I actually making a difference? So again, just a lot of beneficial work way beyond what we had originally envisioned this was going to be for.
So now, assessment PD, or post-tested, we are able to use data as evidence of student performance in our Gen Ed program review. And I don't know if any of you have engaged in Gen Ed program review. It is amorphous, it's kind of a monster, because Gen Ed, among the American Public Community Colleges, is just like all out there.
So how are you defining Gen Ed program?
So we chose courses. We just had to make the decision. At some point, you just have to decide what you're going to do. Or you can talk about it all year long. And so we had each one of the chairs of areas that had Gen Ed, you know, psychology, philosophy, religious studies, languages, English, math. We all chose 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 courses that were our highest enrollment and had learning outcomes embedded. And we just chose those as example courses to include in the Gen Ed program review. So we just designated those. We understand that there are a lot more students can take, but at some point you have to make a decision and move forward. And so that's what we did. So now we're able to just select those courses, get that data, and use it for our Gen Ed program review, along with the co-curricular data, which the last time I did Gen Ed program review was really hard to figure out. But now we're able to tie it specifically to the co-curricular students that are enrolled in those specific courses that we're including in our Gen Ed program review. And Dustin showed a slide earlier that had the percentages across the top for critical thinking, oral communication, info lit, and all that. When we did the report, it shows that overall, students at Rio Salado College are performing above the college level for all of those 5 learning outcomes. But as Dr. Hatfield mentioned, you have to drill down. It's one thing to make that statement. It's another thing to drill down to the department, course, and assessment level. And now we're able to do that and actually inform change.
So our dad isn't just kind of barely jogging. I want to show you now kind of the dad of the future with Mr. Incredible. So this stuff is not available yet, but this is what I envision where we could go for some of our next steps. So one of the things, we have all of this data. Rather than just aggregating things at the course, at the assessment level, I can actually track one student across their entire time at Rio. And I can see all the different critical thinking assessments, where they were assessed on critical thinking across their entire time at Rio Salado College. So this type of longitudinal type analysis, I envision we could use 2 different ways. One of them could be like a little badge or some kind of evidence that our student, this particular student, has demonstrated proficiency in this particular area because we've been able to document either their growth or performing at a high enough level. But I'm struggling with how to do this, but I can envision it. But we could actually take a program. So let's say we have an associate degree in law enforcement technology. And we could take all of our students who have graduated from that program. We can map all of their learning going back to the beginning of their time at Rio Salado College and see for our student learning outcomes, how do our program graduates learn over time? Is our program actually meeting the needs of these students on a program level for all of our student learning outcomes? So I'm really having a hard time kind of mapping when you got one student, another student, and you just have all these things, but that's the direction that I want to go with this. Another thing that just came to my mind recently, I was at a conference earlier this week, and we started talking about performance gaps for underserved student populations, for older students, for minority students, for low socioeconomic demographic students. And again, this is just aggregating student data. So I know at the individual student level, who are my underserved students, who are my underrepresented students. So I am trying to figure out ways that we can actually tie that information to our assessment efforts so we can look at, do we have certain assessments where our young white males are performing very, very well, but perhaps this assessment is not working for other student populations, whether it be race, socioeconomic area, or whatever it may be. So now it's not just, oh yeah, across the board, all of our students are performing well enough, but we have pockets of students who are being underserved by our curriculum, by our assessments, whatever it may be. So these are some things that I'm looking forward to developing over the course of the next several years.
And as we were discussing this, because we are in an environment where all students get the same assessments, it's also powerful if we do this work and find there's no significant difference among the different populations. I mean, you don't know, we haven't gotten that far, but as we were discussing, we said, hey, you know, that in itself is powerful data to have. If you run the numbers and find out it doesn't matter, according to whatever group you're associated with, the students are performing at more or less the same level. That's another research project we need to embark on. So anyway, this is
Where did the students that dropped the class fall in the statistics? They go right out of there.
no, they're still included. If they completed the assessment, they're in there. Yeah, because we're not looking at longitudinal for one particular student. So anyone that took that assessment, they're in there. The numbers, and you can see it in the numbers for class assessments, like the first, couple assignments, you might have 500 students that have taken them, and as it goes down, there's fewer and fewer, typically for that same time period because students have dropped off. So this is what, oh, I'm not there, okay, okay. So that was Dustin's idea for the future, that we're able to do all of this longitudinal data, future research projects, all that kind of business. My vision of the future is being able to call up assessment on my wrist, like Dave Council.
Yeah.
Kit or Dad, show me the results for my lesson 3 assessment in Spanish 1 or 2. So
Yeah.
his may be a little bit more realistic than mine, but I certainly can work together to make something happen.
I'm not planning on doing this. Okay, so one of the things that we've shared kind of our process and what we've come up with, and it works well with our model. But I don't believe that it works well because of our model. I think that there are many other curricular models, course models that this could apply to. That, you know, hopefully this isn't just a waste of your time sitting here, because as long as you can have some level of standardization, you can have some level of alignment, you have all of your assessment data in one place, you can all do a lot of the same work. I think there was another question over here.
Yeah, I teach that common 100 class. Every year I have students, or every semester, every time I have new students, they all have problems with the final exam. And 2 or 3 times I send in, can we change this question? Can we change? Well, they changed it, but my students are still having problems. Is there any way to look at that final exam and see if they just changed it recently to see if it's any better now than it was?
Yes, absolutely. And they can drill down to, you know, if the whole course underwent a massive revision in the new version, they can isolate, is it the new version? They can look at, if they just changed a question or two, and they know the date that they changed those questions, we can say, okay, show me students who answered that question before it was changed, compared to students who answered that question after it was changed.
So I get asked by chair about that particular question.
Absolutely.
Because I constantly have problems with the same assessment. And I send out information to my students, practically tell them what's going to be on the exam, because they don't understand the question.
And I'll speak for Angela here. I'm not a faculty member, but I would imagine that as we're engaging in this work, we're more strategic in our efforts, but we're definitely not perfect in our assessment practices. And we're trying to make informed decisions about where do we need to focus our current efforts. But all of our faculty chairs rely so much on information and feedback from their faculty who are in the weeds with our students. So I would imagine that your faculty chair would absolutely appreciate saying, hey, I think there's some areas with this. Can you look on a bigger scale, how are things going?
Well, and that's kind of how education works, and Dr. Hatfield even talked about that with assessment. Sometimes you go to tweak something and it breaks something else. So it may be that the students are now understanding the thing that you thought was the problem to begin with, but by changing that, now it's messing up something else. That just happens in education, and we just have to keep going back and back. I happen to have my French 201 class, for some unknown reason, is the one class that I have to keep going back and trying again and trying again. And we haven't quite figured out where is it that it's not quite right. Do we need a little bit more instruction? Is the assessment not quite right? Because each time we put in an intervention, it doesn't seem to move the needle. You know, that's just the nature of education, I think, that you have to keep trying.
It's also, I think, that we don't have scientifically designed research methodology with people who know how to do that kind of work, because that's one thing. Second thing is that we have different students every semester. It's not like, you know, the baker who orders the best strawberries, the best flour, the best everything, and puts it all together and gets the same outcome every time. We have students who come in with different levels of experience and motivation and everything. So these data are going to change just based on that. And it's not to say that we shouldn't do it, though. I'm not saying that, but I think that we need to use some common sense when we take a look at this data and not to kid ourselves to think that we've come up with some scientifically based conclusions with the methodologies that we're using.
That being said, currently, and I know we're about out of time, but Rio is engaged in several randomized controlled trials that we're doing, you know, very sound research design. And we can look at the data because we have it and we can aggregate it. We can compare students in a control group versus a treatment group that are, it's still not perfect, we get that, but the type of data that we have and how we've grouped it and aggregated it makes for much more, makes it possible for much more rigorous and scientific exploration. One final question.
how did you determine 70% as the cut score that equates to performing at college level?
We just did. I mean, honestly, we said 70% is a C, so let's start there. And once we've addressed all of that, then we can move it up to 75%. It was just a place to start, honestly. There was no real science to it. It was just so we could get started. Yeah, it was just so we could get started.